I'm taking up a really exciting new role as Director of Health and Biosecurity with CSIRO. That's a really exciting role for me, to be with a really preeminent national research and innovation organisation is super exciting, and to be involved in that work nationally, regionally and with international connections is a role that I'm very excited about and looking forward to. Very happy to take questions. Any regrets? Oh, look, there shouldn't be a person in the world who's been part of the public health response who wouldn't reflect on things that they would do differently, things that they regret. I'm absolutely no different in that regard. We acted with the understanding and information that we had at the time, with the best of intentions, and with an eternally focused eye on protecting the health and wellbeing of Victorians. That was absolutely my view. Would I do things differently with the knowledge that I have now, with the understanding we have about the virus, about it, everything to do with it? Absolutely I would. But my intent was always to protect the health and wellbeing of Victorians.
Anything in particular you would have done differently, or is that more of a general reflection?
Oh, it's both. Look, looking at the response internationally, I think everyone recognises that the earlier that you take action, the better off you are. Mike Ryan, Head of Emergencies for WHO, said, do not let perfect get in the way of acting quickly. That is the most essential thing. And so seeing how things are trending and acting as early as you possibly can is a really key one. It's also very clear, and again the world kind of came to it slowly. Victoria did pretty well in this regard. It was an airborne virus, and indoor spaces, in particular crowded indoor spaces with activity that generates aerosols and has lots of talking and lots of activity, are the most dangerous. And especially in those spaces where those individuals most at risk, aged care, disability, healthcare, you need to make those spaces that are as protected as possible. So the lessons on ventilation, opening doors and windows to augment natural ventilation, but also HEPA filters and what we've rolled out in schools, a really critical lesson. And I wish the world had come to that earlier. And of course, I'm glad Victoria came to it when it did, but wouldn't it have been great if we'd had those lessons right through quarantine, right through all of our settings from the get-go.
When did you make the decision to leave? Was it your decision to resign?
Yeah, of course it was my decision to resign. I have been through the process with CSIRO in recent weeks, and when the offer was made to me, I took it up.
Any idea who will be replacing you?
No, the department will no doubt go through a process over coming months. I'm not about to depart immediately, but they'll work through those transitions, and I want to be around to make that as smooth and as robust as possible.
When do you actually finish off here?
To be determined, but I'll have a few months here yet, and we'll work out the exact transition date to make sure that it happens as smoothly as possible.
Brett, there are always rumours or speculation that you may have not seen eye to eye with the Premier or the government of the day, certainly towards the end of the pandemic. How is your relationship with the Premier, and has he personally said thanks?
He said thanks on Twitter. I've seen that today, and very generously. I have a great relationship with the Premier. I don't think the tensions that might exist between, my purist public health view or my role as a statutory officer and Cabinet or with the whole of the Victorian government is any different from any other jurisdiction in the world. Those tensions will exist. I come with my view and my filter. They have broader considerations, and they have constituents that they're accountable to. But we talked it through, and we came to decisions collectively, and I took responsibility for the things that I signed off on. As you know, the pandemic legislation has changed. That's also been a not inappropriate evolution in the way that we think about the Westminster system, and a pandemic that's stretched out for years and years.
What are you most looking forward to now? I mean, obviously you're going to another job, but I guess what are you excited about?
Having beers with my mates in the department, meeting up with new teams in CSIRO and those research teams and all the exciting work that they do. CSIRO stretches across really, really interesting areas, from the square kilometre array to, you know, inventors of Wi-Fi. So there is absolute, you know, science nerd heaven that goes on in CSIRO, and be really excited to be part of that. But in the health and biosecurity portfolios, just to get my head around all of the fantastic work that I know is happening in that space.
We haven't seen the last of you yet.
Oh, look, I hope that my engagement with the department continues. I think CSIRO has a lot to offer, you know, medical research institutes, other health agencies across the country, and vice versa. CSIRO wants to access the brains trust all around this country, and so I hope you know, my team here will be part of that.
When you took on this role, it obviously exploded. There was the pandemic, we've had inquiries, all different sorts of things, and one of the, I guess, the commons between many of you who fronted up during that time was the pressure that it puts not only on yourself but on your family. Are you able to talk to that, and I guess are you perhaps happy to step away and let them step away too?
Yeah, it'll be a relief to be away from that. You know, I accept that in a crisis that has to sit on your shoulders. There's no escaping that, and I was, you know, in the midst of that beast for a long time. Victoria carried the heavy load in that regard. On the one hand, it's helped me to grow personally and professionally. On the other hand, it nearly crushed me, and it certainly weighed upon my family life, and I don't want them to have to carry that in the same way ever again. They won't, but you know, what a rock for me to have the family that I do have, and my enormous thanks to them for really carrying me through those times.
When you say it nearly crushed you, what were those moments and why were they so difficult?
Oh, look, it's the cumulative 16-hour days. It's sprinting for 6 months without a day off, and you know, you can throw in the vitriol and the death threats and the intrusions and the kind of barrage of lies that you see, especially in social media. Critiques are totally fine. Accountability is appropriate for any public office holder, but the BS that is sometimes spouted out there is quite extraordinary sometimes, and you know, as much as you can set it aside, it still weighs on you because it's directed so vociferously in your direction. But you know, it is what it is, and I've had so many lovely expressions of thanks today, and the support of my colleagues, and what a magnificent team that supported me through the last 3.5 years. My gratitude to them is really unbounded.
Is there a particular piece of BS that really annoyed you?
Oh no, the list is far too long to pick out a single thing.
Why make the decision to leave now? Were you ready for a new challenge, or did you feel that you'd finalised your part in the department?
Look, a bit of both. I think clearly we've gone through the toughest period in the department, but I'm ready for a new challenge, and it's exciting to stretch myself in different directions.
Did you feel you could do your job properly, particularly later in your tenure, without being able to freely communicate your message?
Look, I think I've always had a pretty decent rapport with the general community in Victoria, and I'm really grateful for the way that they engage with me. It's not always a straightforward space to give a public health message, and sometimes the science changes over time, and sometimes the message is actually very nuanced. Social media in particular can be extraordinarily black and white and can be really absolutist, and it's not easy to get those key messages across, and sometimes you know, I'd really welcome, you know, like a 45-minute vlog or blog or kind of town hall to be able to talk through some of those things. You don't get those opportunities, including here, to talk through some of the nuances of public health decision making and of the pandemic. You know, there was a lot said about what the vaccine does and doesn't do. That changed through the course of the last 3.5 years. When the vaccine first rolled out, it absolutely stopped infection from occurring in a significant proportion of people. That changed over months that followed, and it became less and less effective at stopping transmission and still very effective at stopping severe disease. The kind of commentary that takes that out of context and said, oh, you lied here, or you were telling the truth there, but you're lying now, that's absurd. And it would have been great to have the opportunity to talk through that with all of its complexities and the fact that, you know, as the science changes, as the understanding that you personally have or as that you have as a public health team changes over time, you'd like to change the message. There's not a lot of scope for that, especially in social media world, but that's the reality of you know, scientific and evidence-based policy making.
But did you feel frozen out, say, after the pandemic legislation got brought in and there was a bit of loss of power there, and you mentioned your relationship with the Premier as well?
Look, the legislation changed, but there's also policy decision making on behalf of government in terms of where they're turning their attention to, and you know, the way that the phases of the pandemic progressed. I've changed myself. The challenges of the pandemic in 2020, 2021 were extraordinarily different, and it was right and proper to be up there every day for days and days in a row. That's not the case now, but I'm still of the view that there's a lot of benefit in informing people about how to protect themselves, and I still know that there are some challenges there in terms of the things that we could continue to do. As you know, 50, 60 people die in Victoria every week. You know, I don't think we could prevent all of those deaths from occurring, but I know that we could pick up those booster vaccines more so. I know that we could continue to test and continue to take antivirals as required. So those messages are still as pertinent as ever. That's what my Friday weekly show release is all about, and that's continuing.
So do you think the government needs to do more to promote and respond to COVID in the community right now?
Look, I think we always need to keep an eye on how well the kind of key interventions are being taken up. It's good to see that kind of steady vaccine coverage continues, but I think, you know, the efforts will provide a decent return, especially protecting those who are most at risk with vaccine boosters is particularly important.
The role of the Chief Health Officer obviously extends well beyond COVID. The geriatrician Kate Gregorovich has tweeted today that the biggest problem in health is not a virus, it's different life expectancy and health status by socioeconomic status, and that she would love to see a new Chief Health Officer with a strong focus on population health, particularly social determinants of health and equity. What's your response to that view?
Don't disagree at all. She's completely right. To imply, though, that we haven't had an eye on the social determinants of health through all of this is incorrect. We absolutely have. We've done the analysis. We've understood that those who are in lower socioeconomic groups are most at risk of hospitalisation and of dying, have the biggest barriers to access to vaccination, access to antivirals, and have worked tirelessly to make sure that we reach out to them and make appropriate mechanisms to allow them access to those kind of interventions. We discuss social determinants or broader determinants of health every day, and we continue to make it a departmental and a public health division priority. So totally agree with Kate on that.
Obviously your period as Chief Health Officer coincided with the pandemic, and to a large degree it had to be your primary focus. Are there other areas of health that you think have suffered because of that reality?
Oh, for all of us, we've not been able to provide as much attention, as much commentary, as much investment in other significant threats to health. It doesn't mean that there hasn't been work going on. A lot of it's been going on and hasn't been recognised, but there are other existential risks to health, and they're often climate related. Japanese encephalitis, Murray Valley encephalitis, both related to the significant flooding events in Victoria that is effectively climate related as volatile climate becomes a reality for the whole world. Mpox, another threat. I mean, we've responded to all of those, but it's hard juggling all of those threats at once. But I do think, climate and health will be a key need for us to focus on into the future. Extreme heat events, extended bushfire seasons, the Northern Hemisphere and New York blanketed in the worst pollution globally is a lesson for the southeast of Australia that has exactly the same kind of conditions through summer and could face exactly the same threats. And, it should be a lesson to us that good, clean indoor air, which is a benefit for transmission of respiratory viruses, will also be a huge protection against particulate matter from bushfire seasons. The 110,000 HEPA filters in our kids' schools will be protection through a bushfire season if we have to face that.
And so does your departure have anything to do with any ongoing legal matters related to the Arctic Foods?
No, not at all.
Will you write a tell-all one day?
I don't think so.
Not off the cards.
It's the last 3.5 years is too much of a blur to be able to recall it. To be frank, anyway, it's not front of mind. That's for sure.
You mentioned off the top things you would have done differently, acting quicker and essentially doing more sooner. Is there anything you would have done less of, say, particular restrictions that people have carried with them about tower lockdowns and playground lockdowns?
I think knowing what we know about the risk of transmission indoors versus outdoors, the freedoms that we could allow outdoors are clearly greater, and we know that through lots of studies. It wasn't apparent early on, and there were clearly concerns about transmission outdoors, but the risk is 18, 20 times less. That's clear, and it should mean that if you're not in a elimination space, you're just trying to control risk as much as possible, then that outdoor life, and we've emphasised it for months and months now, that outdoor life is really what you want to emphasise.
What time does beer start?
Not today. I've got another couple of interviews, I think, and I'm not leaving yet. I've got a few months with transition work and lots of thanks from me to my team.
Do you hope there'll be time for a break between finishing this role and starting your next one?
Yeah, I hope so. I've got my garden's gone a bit crazy, so yeah, whatever it takes to get some things back on track that have been neglected.
Any tips for who else coming up?
Too many to name. Look, I think I've tried to bring my authentic self to the crisis comm space. I would make the same case. That sometimes means, facing up to the messiness of admitting you got stuff wrong, apologising as you should, saying things are different this week than they were last week, but being okay with that.
And sorry to bring it back to this one last time, but in particular you mentioned outdoor settings have kind of changed. Tower lockdowns in particular, is that something you would have adjusted, or schools being shut like in particular?
Look, I know the towers stuff is still before the courts, but towers are a high transmission risk area. I think if there's any lesson for those high density settings, it's that they've got, a bit like aged care settings, disability settings, they've got high risk, kind of inherent risks to them, and they need the kind of planning and ventilation and other work. But I don't want to comment specifically on stuff that's still before the courts.
Just with the school one saying in particular, because I know a big review from some academics came out about how the entire nation handled its response, and shutting schools in one area they wish that they could avoid next time. What did you make of that?
Yeah, look, I think again in circumstances where we need to stop all transmission to get to effective elimination, so that we could all then just get on with living a normal life, or as normal as possible, we recognised that transmission in schools was a reality. And, you know, recent research from the US indicating that children are the ones that bring COVID into households 70% of the time, means that we have to recognise that schools can be a really significant driver of transmission. When you're in a situation like now, where you're not at zero transmission, transmission is happening in all kinds of settings, then schools should absolutely stay open. And the benefits of school life for kids, socially, academically, are incredibly important. But you need to do all of those mitigations to help them. And HEPA filters and thinking about ventilation is a key one. But, you know, it was a different time in 2020, and you know, the recognition that there was lots of transmission that could take place in schools was the right one. Thank you.